Welcome and hello to everybody. That was a weird hello, but I like it. I'm going to stand by it. It is the first Wednesday in February, which means it is signing day. The weather outside, it's pretty disgustingly cold here in New York, but the fax machines are warm. So I am joined by Bud Elliott of SB Nation, editor of SB Nation Recruiting. He is all over the place. Sports Bud Nation has hit its peak today.
Signing Bud Nation.
Signing Bud Nation has hit its peak. Let's stop with all of the nonsense and tell me to you, what have been your early reactions, or really not even early, your big reactions at signing day? A lot of huge commitments, more than I think these past couple years in terms of blue chips announcing on signing day. Where are your surprises? Who's doing well? Who's doing poorly?
Early stories so far, Auburn and UCLA so far.
Yes.
Auburn lands Byron Cowart, or so we thought. I mean, as of this point, Cowart has apparently signed letters of intent to two schools, both Florida and Auburn. Apparently left one with his high school coach, whose son coaches at Florida, which is very interesting, committed to Auburn on television.
Yep.
And yet Auburn has not received the fax letter of intent, which is, of course, the go-ahead from the NCAA to announce his official commitment there. So very much a developing situation. And then UCLA landed Roquan Smith out of Montezuma, Georgia, over Georgia. But yet he's not officially
fax
signed yet.
machine drama has gotten big on signing day.
It is big. His head coach says that he has not sent his letter of intent yet, and those two are about to meet to figure things out, according to one of the reporters down there. So.
Yes, a TV announcement is not binding.
No, it's
the
not.
Letter of intent. We saw it with Cyrus Quandro a few years ago. We saw it with Alex Collins at Arkansas a couple years ago. It gets real weird with this antiquated technology, so it's important to keep tabs. Even though somebody announces it, does not mean that it is a done deal. So you mentioned UCLA. Who else to you has been impressive today? Ohio State, maybe not pulling a bunch of kids that they weren't expected to, but locking up a lot of guys who could have been wavering on their commitments.
Keeping Mike Weber, landing Isaiah Prince. Ohio State, not as many spots to offer maybe as some of these SEC schools.
Right.
Still managed to take a pretty big class, and remember what they have coming back off this national championship team.
So they can't point to a number of positions with immediate openings, but obviously coming off of a national championship, they have momentum just in terms of their position in the public eye. Obviously the SEC cleaning up, not a huge surprise with how much effort goes into recruiting down south. UCLA does a good job. You mentioned the Roquan Smith. Last year, of course, they pull a linebacker from the New Orleans area, Kenny Thomas, I believe. Yep. This year, of course, going into Georgia, but we'll see if he sends in his letter of intent.
And they got Soso Jamabo today as well,
yes,
the running back out of Texas.
He is excited for, there we go, where's my camera? I want the close camera for this one. He is excited for Asian girls in Westwood.
According to his tweet.
According to a tweet, yes. So,
Which may be a song lyric, by the way.
Yes.
But also might be true.
Also may be true. Both can totally be true. Daylon Mack reaffirms his previous commitment to Texas A&M, the large defensive tackle.
Time is a flat circle.
Time is a flat circle, whatever that means. So, yes, the Byron Cowart thing is obviously something to pay attention to. He was being recruited by Florida while Will Muschamp was there, and now has committed to Auburn. We'll see if the letter of intent goes in there. And obviously, the afternoon ahead still promises to be pretty exciting, with USC looking to lock up a number of blue chips out west and sort of match UCLA recruit for recruit. Georgia doing a very nice job today.
Another guy, Van Jefferson, who apparently flipped back to Georgia after committing to Ole Miss, and then Michigan thought they had him. So was it going to be Ole Miss? Was it going to be Michigan?
Right.
No, it's Georgia, and he's not sending his letter of intent in yet as of 1:07 today. So
absolutely,
a lot of fax machine drama as we go into this early show.
Yep, and a lot of SEC schools pulling top kids from states they're perhaps not used to. Ole Miss with DeMarcus Lodge.
Yep.
LSU going into the state of Florida a little bit this year, which normally LSU is able to just build that wall around.
Grabbing Kevin Toller out of Jacksonville.
Absolutely. All right, so let's stay within the SEC. We have CB from Roll Bama Roll to talk about Alabama's absolutely monstrous signing class. Not a huge surprise, but how you feeling today, CB, when you look at the list of just blue chipper after blue chipper after blue chipper?
Well, it just seems kind of ho-hum to Nick Saban these days. Just another day at the office, I guess.
What are the names to you? Because there are so many names that jump off to either be an early impact guy or that you can't wait to watch 3 or 4 years of.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could take up your whole show talking about each and every one.
Please
of them,
do not.
But I won't. Well, I think one of the top ones is wide receiver Calvin Ridley, who he's one of the top receivers in the nation.
Yep.
And with Bama losing Amari Cooper, Christian Jones, and DeAndre White, they're going to need somebody to step in and carry that load of the big play receiver. And I think if you saw him in the Under Armour game and some of these other camps around the summer, that he can step in and do that.
And it's one thing to...
And then,
please.
Oh, I was going to mention also Damian Harris.
Yes.
Who a lot of people are saying is a Mark Ingram clone. He's tough round guy who can barrel up the middle, and a lot of people are excited about him. And he's also going to be filling in for T.J. Yeldon, who left. And Saban likes to carry a stable of running backs, so he looks like a guy who could get a lot of playing time as a freshman.
And it's one thing to build up a stable of 5-stars everywhere, but obviously different teams have different needs and different fits. When you look at this class, a class that focused on quarterback with the big signing of Blake Barnett, but also along the offensive line and at defensive back, a position group that Alabama hasn't, they've put a ton of guys into the NFL with, but they've struggled at times playing in the actual games with. What names do you feel like position group-wise that they really succeeded with?
Well, if you happen to catch the Sugar Bowl this year, you see that they have a little problem covering people.
Yes.
We have some problems in the secondary, and they picked up two very solid 5-star corners in Kendall Sheffield and Minka Fitzpatrick, who, by the way, his fax just went in about 5 minutes ago.
Oh, and there it is.
There we go.
And also Deontay Thompson and Ronnie Harrison are two really big safeties. They're both, well, one of them 6'2" and the other 6'3". I can't remember which, but they're big guys who can hit a ton. And if you couple that with Marlon Humphrey and from last year and Tony Brown, I think the future's looking pretty bright at the secondary for Alabama.
All right, CB, thank you very much for your time. And I have a feeling that he and the rest of the Alabama Tide fan base, they're going to be sleeping pretty easy tonight.
I think the toughest card to put together today was Alabama. It's like, which of these 5-stars do we include on our screen?
This is true. This is true. So give me one. He mentioned Calvin Ridley. I know you're very high on him. What makes him so good and so special enough to come in and play right away? Calvin's
just a really natural pass catcher. Big hands, soft, easily receives the ball. You can see that he has good long speed, but he also has good acceleration, and it's an easy top speed. He's a true deep threat. Yep. We saw at the opening he made a great one-handed catch. We're seeing him down here. Amazing size coming right into the SEC where he's going to have to be physical, and as you see here, as a slot guy. And he's very smooth. He'll remind you, some people think he's like Amari Cooper. I don't know if he's that shifty, but he's just very natural, smooth pass catcher, a guy who's a pretty solid route runner, but receiving the football, really good at it. One of the tops in the country. Didn't get to play his entire senior year because he ran up against the Florida 19-year, 9-month maximum age limit rule for high schoolers. But a really good player and somebody Alabama fans should be happy about. Daylon Charlotte as well, the receiver they have. Yes. Huge kid out of Louisiana. They beat LSU for him. Big pickup for Nick Saban and co. Lose two senior receivers plus Amari to the draft. You got to have some receivers. You have to stock up, as you saw there. Great ball skills going up high. Seems to be as complete a receiver as there is in the country. I know you like Torrance Gibson, even though he perhaps doesn't have a WR in front of his name. What makes Torrance Gibson so good? I think he just has incredible long speed, and he reaches it very quickly, and he's 6'4". All right, you mentioned Alabama going into the state of Louisiana to pull out some talent. We now have Dan Davis from and the Valley Shook on the line, who LSU themselves, not a bad signing day whatsoever when you look at the level of athlete that they're able to recruit. Dan, how are you feeling on signing day thus far? Are you happy with the haul that Les Miles has put together?
Oh, absolutely. It's been a good day. I'd say even 3 weeks ago, the class wasn't looking as strong. It seemed like momentum was kind of dying out with Chavis leaving and, Brick Haley's situation being up in the air, not having a defensive coordinator.
Right.
And, once we get Steele and Ogeron, it seems like the momentum just flipped right back on. Pull a major shocker getting Chidi Valentine Okiki and closing out on Arden Key. So I think it was a really strong finish that's going to put LSU right there, either in the top 5 or close to it.
Now we're looking at some of the names. Who do you think can come in right away? Obviously, they put together an enormous class last season on both sides of the ball. What are some of the names? Obviously, Dante Jackson, a relatively recent commit. Kevin Tolliver, extremely talented, but they're so young and talented already. So who breaks through, whether it's as like a nickel, as a rotation guy, or on special teams?
I think Tolliver has a great chance because he's already on campus. Mm-hmm. And, the number 2 cornerback spot is up for grabs with Jalen Collins going to the NFL and losing Rashard Robinson. So I think we'll have a great chance to, get in there, mix it up, and impress Steele right away. And he's obviously got some competition because he's still got high-ranked guys like Ed Paris from last year that are going to be vying for it too. But Tolliver is the guy that sticks out to me. Tehima too at guard, because we have a opening at guard and he's got natural size and strength, and if he comes in shape, he could be vying for a starting spot.
All right, and when you look at what they were able to accomplish in terms of addressing specific needs or areas where they've needed to improve, are there groups? Obviously, LSU focusing on running back. They focus on corner. It seems every year they do. But you mentioned the interior of the offensive line. Are you good? Are you happy with the depth of this class for future needs?
Yeah, I mean, they nailed the offensive line, just hit it out of the park. They got 5 guys, and all of them are, really good talents. The lowest ranked guy is probably a really high ranked 3-star that the staff got to see a lot in person and liked. So you got to feel good about that if you're an LSU fan. I think the big miss was the linebacker core. They struck out on Leo Lewis this morning, didn't get any other guys, and the depth chart looks relatively thin there. So if there's a big miss in the signing class, it's definitely the linebackers.
All right, Dan, thank you very much for your time. Another fan base that should be pretty happy, all things considered, with their haul this year. Who jumps out to you? He mentioned Tolliver. Jackson's the recent commit. State of Louisiana, obviously, per capita, I think you mentioned at some point the highest number of blue chips of any state in the country. So are you happy with what you've seen these guys?
Yeah.
Who, to your eyes, is that guy?
I've seen most all their kids in person this year. It's a very physically impressive class. I mean, Tehima, the guard, is really huge. Tyron Johnson is a very polished receiver. Kevin Tolliver, though, is probably their top commit, and he's a very, I don't want to use the word polished again, but I will.
What makes him so good?
He works at his craft. He has good transitions in and out of his breaks. He mirrors well. He's also really physical. I once saw him at a 7-on-7 event actually pancake press this kid into a ground, and then the ref threatened to toss him, which was pretty funny in a 7-on-7 event. But he has good intensity, and I think when he's challenged, he really rises to the occasion. He's one of the top corners in the country.
Yeah, a little bit surprising, and maybe it had to do with the linebacking sort of misses with John Chavis leaving. They've been running that 4-2-5, so that's something to pay attention to on the field for LSU in the coming years. But yes, when you look at defensive backs with their recent history of Claiborne, with Honey Badger, with Patrick Peterson, you can recruit anybody in the South and say, look what we're going to do for your career at LSU. So totally makes sense, and they've put themselves in a good position. They still need a quarterback.
And we have some news before our next guest here. ESPN is reporting via Armwood head coach that Byron Cowart is now undecided, which I think in the industry we call this a segue, right?
We do call this a segue.
With Hutchins coming up?
With Andy Hutchins coming up from Alligator Army in a moment. And of course, check out all of the fine work on Roll Bama Roll and Anna Valley Shook for Alabama and LSU, recruiting and team coverage for all sports. But yeah, Byron Cowart. And he was somebody very vocal during the recruiting process about what he wanted from schools. Will Muschamp, of course, recruited him to Florida. Now the defensive coordinator at Auburn.
Named 3 or 4 different leaders at different points in time.
Right.
You always kind of thought Florida would be in the picture, and that it would take something really special for him to get pulled away from Florida.
Right.
And then Muschamp gets fired, and Florida has a subpar season.
Sure.
And Muschamp goes to Auburn, a school that he had actually considered some previously, and then he already had the long-standing connection with Will Muschamp there at Auburn. Announces for Auburn today, apparently had signed 2 letters of intent.
Yep.
None have been faxed so far. Let's.
Which defensive line? When you look at Auburn's defensive line, you look at Florida's defensive line right now. A couple of losses to the NFL, but Auburn's defensive line obviously gets healthier with the return of Carl Lawson.
Yeah.
And if you're a defensive end, and you mentioned that Cowart struggled in state championship game in Florida, getting double teamed a lot.
Well, he was double teamed a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
At times he's great, and then at times you kind of wonder where he is.
Right.
That's sometimes common with 5-star defensive linemen. They're not always challenged. I don't know if he's the true number 1 overall player in the country. I think this is a year where we have 4 or 5 guys who are legitimately in the conversation for number 1 overall player.
With Auburn's defensive line talent, obviously, you'll be receiving less and less attention as an incoming defensive lineman because of this talent around you. All right, we're now joined by Andy Hutchins, of Alligator Army, who is right in the middle of the Byron Cowart drama. What are you hearing? What are you seeing beyond Cowart? How do you feel about the class thus far that Jim McElwain has put together?
So briefly on Byron Cowart, I honestly think that he's torn. And I think that this is a story that he might not have resolved until the end of the day. Obviously, everyone thought maybe 12 months ago, 6 months ago even, that Cowart was going to be a Florida Gator.
Yep.
He comes from a high school program, Armwood, that has produced a lot of Florida Gators. He had a really good relationship with Will Muschamp. People thought that if Muschamp was going to be able to stay, that he was going to be able to make a really clean sweep of the 5 stars in Florida, Cowart included. Obviously, that didn't happen. Muschamp's now at Auburn, and Cowart's relationship with Muschamp goes with him. I think that relationship is probably the main reason that Cowart picked Auburn earlier today. Playing time is going to be a thing for him, I think, too, but I honestly think that the comfort with Muschamp was the reason he picked Auburn. Now, does Sean Callahan, the coach, who is a Florida alum at Armwood, maybe get back in Byron's ear this morning and talk to him? Maybe you're thinking this through. I don't know. I don't think we're necessarily going to get a resolution until the end of the day.
All right.
I definitely believe that there's 2 national letters of intent signed. I just don't know which one's getting faxed in.
All right. When you look at the rest of the class, obviously not an ideal situation with the head coach coming in so late in the recruiting process, but obviously Florida in on so many of the top kids later on in the process, win some, lose some. Jordan Scarlett, the recent running back commit, much coveted around the Southeast. Obviously a very nice piece, and Florida needed that running back. But when you look at the depth of the class, what are the names that you're most excited about in the short term?
Obviously, you've got to be excited about Martez Ivy just because he's so good. He might not necessarily be a guy who can play right away. I think Bud's already talked and written about how he maybe got to add some weight and get a little bit better. Worked in a veer running scheme in high school, not necessarily going to translate to the SEC immediately. But Scarlett's obviously a guy who could come in and play, maybe make some big plays right away. I think you could probably take somebody like Jabari Zuniga, who's a defensive lineman. You could plug him in because Florida needs pass rushers and doesn't really necessarily have one beyond Brian Cox Jr., because Dante Fowler going to the NFL is going to leave Florida sort of without that guy.
Right.
C.C. Jefferson, if he commits, could be sort of that guy too. But, playmakers, Scarlett's a guy that you could look at. Antonio Callaway, who committed earlier this morning, is a guy you could look at. It's just hard to figure out exactly where Florida's going to play some of these guys because, Florida's not really gotten a whole lot of production on offense for the last few years. You may have noticed.
Yes.
So it's figuring out where these guys can make plays and then putting them on the field, really. That's going to be the difference for this class.
And your confidence level moving forward, Jim McElwain, head coach, and the staff he's put together. As for recruiting, obviously Florida takes a step back on the recruiting trail this past year with all that they were going through under Muschamp and his staff. Are you confident that McElwain, with his SEC experience and contacts within the Southeast, will once again bring Florida back to a threat to be a top 5 perennial recruiting team?
Yeah, I do. I think he's got a pretty good chance of that. And I think you have to look at his staff and say, okay, he's done a pretty good job of assembling a staff that's going to be competitive in the SEC. Jeff Collins, obviously, an SEC defensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. Randy Shannon, who's a beast in South Florida. Kirk Callahan, son of Sean Callahan, who is a guy who had a little bit of repute at UCF. The defensive staff has been really good, and McElwain's obviously a top-flight offensive mind. Bringing in Doug Nussmeier, who had an up-and-down tenure at Alabama as the offensive coordinator, but really did do a fair bit to help Alabama win national titles, gives them a brain trust on offense. I think not having a wide receivers coach, which Florida still doesn't, might have been an issue today.
Right.
Brian Davis obviously committing to Auburn, and then Javaris Davis just now committing to Auburn over Florida. But that's an issue that sort of gets resolved, and Florida's already got a commit for a really good 2016 wide receiver. So that's something that, as soon as you install a wide receivers coach, the worries about whether a wide receivers coach not being there being a problem disappear.
All right. Yep. Andy Hutchins, Alligator Army, thank you very much for your time. And I think the Byron Cowart thing is going to be real weird. I think it's going to get pretty strange.
Could be interesting down the stretch here. That's,
all right. I was just going to ask if you agreed, disagreed with what he was talking about with Florida. Obviously, you cover Florida State full-time, a big beneficiary of their struggles these past few years. Both on, both on and off the field. Are you confident in what Florida's done this season and what they're going to be able to do moving forward?
Yeah, I think Florida was smart here too in that they reached for positions where they desperately need bodies.
Right.
But they didn't just do it just to fill out an entire class all over. And next year in 2016 in Florida, the state is pretty loaded. Florida State is probably not going to take a huge class next year. Florida does have a bunch of really good recruiters on their team. Jeff Collins, a very good recruiter at Mississippi State, did a lot of really nice things there in Starkville. I think Florida's going to be able to have a nice class next year, a really nice class. They took bodies in the offensive line where they needed to. Martez Ivy, the longest arms of anybody at the U.S. Army All-American game this year. He's 280-ish. He's never really passed pro'd, so you wonder if he has the instant impact, but long-term, you got to really love that kid. He's extremely athletic.
And what will be important to watch, as Jim McElwain, obviously with his experience in more pro style and more pro spread stuff, is how he recruits. Not necessarily the 4 and 5 stars, but recruiting to the specific transitionary system that he will be installing in Gainesville. We saw the lessons learned when Gene Chizik decided to go pro style out of nowhere after Gus Malzahn left, and recruiting was all over the place. Lost Cam. And now Florida, with Will Muschamp trying to go more hurry-up spread last year, but they have more of a pro-style quarterback. So it's figuring out the recruits that best fit, not necessarily that are the most talented, period.
The big three in the state all run a pro style now.
Yes, that is interesting.
Interesting.
And especially because Florida does not themselves produce a number of top quarterback prospects.
Or tight ends.
Or tight ends. So something to pay attention to, but obviously big schools in Florida with Malik Henry next year, with what Miami's been able to do over the years, Brad Kaya. These are all California or West Coast products.
Jack Allison at Manatee.
Yes, absolutely.
Or down in Bradenton area.
Right, okay. So that is important to pay attention to. We're about to talk about some Tennessee Volunteers, which we have not been able to do in recent years. As for top recruiting, which they appear to have right now, they're, depending on where the sort of team rankings you're looking at fall, they're a top 6, 7, 4 team nationally. They've put together a number of kids. So the SEC East, with Florida perhaps bouncing back, with Tennessee finishing the season as strongly as they did last season, Georgia, ups and downs, but certainly looking good. South Carolina needs a bounce-back year after perhaps relying on too much youth at important positions last year. So the SEC East finished the regular season, finished bowl season strong on the field, but really need to support it for years to come with Florida's new coach, Jim McElwain, and with Tennessee now having turnover of their own on the coaching staff with losing their offensive coordinator right before signing day. So the SEC East certainly should be better, maybe, kind of, sorta. And Missouri, we haven't mentioned Terry Beckner.
Yep.
An enormous pull.
Huge get for Missouri, keeping him home. 5-star defensive lineman out of East St. Louis.
Yes.
Ohio State and Auburn kind of dropped out at the end. They thought it was a Missouri-Florida State battle. Both schools did a great job. Ultimately, Missouri gets the job done. A huge win for Gary Pinkel. And you have to think their development of the defensive line in recent years had a lot to do with that.
It's been unbelievable to watch Missouri, and you look at Michael Sam and Coney Ely, Sheldon Richardson, of course, on the Jets, Shane Ray and Marcus Golden this past year. How do you not go? And they maintained their defensive line coach, who was looking like he might head over to Illinois, but he sticks around in Columbia.
Stay close to home, playing time, and basically every factor was there for him. Missouri.
Play in the SEC on that big stage, get that sweet SEC network airtime. Missouri looks to be finally capitalizing on their on-field success that they've had in recent years. Let's actually take a look. We've got some SEC early impact guys that should be enormous. We haven't even mentioned Texas A&M yet, but we've got a list of guys that we think could have an early impact. We mentioned Tennessee, Khalil McKenzie, the legacy, huge defensive tackle. Your thoughts?
Son of Reggie McKenzie, Oakland Raiders GM.
Right.
350-ish pounds and not really extra sloppy fat for being that
Just
size
a big
and
guy.
a high school kid. And the ability to move at that size is really impressive. Christian Kirk, a very polished receiver out of Arizona.
Yes.
Going to Texas A&M spreads the ball around. He should be able to catch a lot of footballs. Tyron Johnson, we already talked about when we spoke about LSU earlier. Byron Cowart will probably be a theme throughout the day for us.
We have him down here as Auburn, but who knows what happens. We might have to change that up later.
And then Calvin Ridley as well, the very polished receiver going to Alabama. Looking to replace Amari Cooper.
Is there anybody not on that list? I feel like there are so many huge commits and there's so much impressive tape out there of guys. I mean, I still remember Vince Wilfork from God knows how long ago just blowing everybody up in South Florida.
In Vero Beach.
But there's a gentleman, and I say that because he is large, and I'm going to call him a gentleman, Trent Thompson, heading to Georgia. Enormous and on that same level as McKenzie in terms of national offensive tackles, just in terms of size. What can Trent Thompson do?
I shook his hand when he was like a 15 or 16-year-old, and I felt like he covered up my watch. The guy is just a freak of an athlete. I mean, to be 310, 315 pounds and move this quickly. Look at this explosion.
Yeah.
The ability when he stays low to fire off the football and just dominate, to split double teams, to scrape down the line, make tackles, be a penetrator, be an actual factor in the pass rush game too. Trent Thompson does it all. A lot of people think he's the number one player in the country.
Look at him out in the open there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and he's very baby-faced. He's young for his grade. This is a guy who's probably maybe not even done growing.
Right.
A real special gift for Georgia right there.
Yeah, his body's still developing, and he looks like offensive line blocking is merely a suggestion when he is down in his stance inside.
I mean, are you really gonna get run over by that train if you're a high school offensive lineman? You're not going to college or anything.
No,
you
absolutely
want to take
not.
those shots?
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, this is a Georgia team that can use that talent on that front. That transitioning. Obviously, Jeremy Pruitt did a nice job last season, but they need to do a better job. Georgia playing week in and week out top defense. So. Trent Thompson, huge. And then Christian Kirk. Let's go to him. We're not going to delve into Texas A&M too much just because we can't make it an all-day SEC affair. But Christian Kirk, so much speed. He looked to be down. He's from Arizona.
He just destroys the competition. I mean, Arizona's not a great state for high school.
Improving, but still not great. And
but if you're an elite prospect, you should really destroy this level of competition, and he does.
Yes.
I mean, extremely quick in and out of his breaks. I don't have him as a 5-star because I don't think his top end is that great. And he's not, 6'3", 6'4", but I think he's probably about the highest 4-star rating that you could give a receiver, somebody who knows how to get open, catches the football, has a lot of football savvy, and A&M's offense where they throw it that much can really be an impact player for them, much like Speedy was last year.
Yes, and looks like an all-purpose type receiver as well. Coming out of the backfield, as we see here, we saw the last clip of him on a return. Yeah, the top-end speed might not be there, but his football savvy, his hands, the field vision all appears to be there. And he's, you mentioned the Speedy Noyle comparison, will not be asked to do a ton his first year, but could come in just because they are running that air raid. They do need warm bodies, and he just, it's a scary amount of speed that's going to be down there in College Station. So Christian Kirk, certainly a name to pay attention to. And if we look at the other SEC early impact guys, if Cowart ends up at Auburn, we talked about him. If he ends up at Florida, he's going to make a mark wherever he goes.
And both of those defensive coordinators, Jeff Collins and Will Muschamp, have a long history of developing defensive linemen. Mississippi State's defense has pretty much been made on its defensive linemen in recent years, and now he's in Gainesville. All
right, let's talk about Tennessee's class real quick. We're trying to get Hunter from Rocky Top Talk on, but we talk about Khalil McKenzie, and just a big dude, not a fat dude, carries the weight very well. But Shai Tuttle, Alvin Kamara, the JC guy coming in.
Loaded class.
Obviously, Drew Richmond, who should be able to come in and at least compete. It's still a young offensive line for Tennessee, but these are guys that are going to be able to come in, and it gives them, especially with how well they finished their season, the depth that they need to compete week in and week out.
Khalil McKenzie, we already spoke about. Preston Williams, some people have him as the number 1 overall receiver in the country. I think regardless of where you have him, he's certainly a top 5 guy. Nice size, good football savvy. Kyle Phillips is a defensive end pass rusher who really came on strong during his senior year. Some guys take a little while longer to develop. He was one of them, dominated in his All-Star game. Shai Tuttle out of North Carolina, another dominant big body on the inside for them. And then Alvin Kamara, who originally remember 2 years ago when we did this, and Alabama signed those 4 running backs who were all blue chippers, and people were like, how are they all going to get carries? And, they didn't. They didn't get carries.
They didn't get those carries.
So one ended up in junior college, and then he ended up doing really, really well in junior college, and now he's at Tennessee and should get a lot of carries there early. Is a nice compliment to Jalen Hurd. Nice pass receiver out of the backfield, could be a good third down back. A little thunder and lightning combo for the Tennessee Vols.
Immediate impact. All right, we're now joined by Hunter from Rocky Top Talk on the SB Nation Network. Hunter, how you feeling about the class? I assume it's a nice cherry on the way that the Vols ended this season. Who are the names that you expect that everybody outside of the SEC East to know that will be donning a lot of orange come the fall?
Well, it's actually really interesting here. I mean, one of the big things that happened not with signing day this year is that what didn't happen, right? So the Vols had a lot of guys committed. They enrolled a lot of guys early. And the teams that came after the guys they were looking at on signing day didn't flip. So Ohio State was looking at a guy named Denzel Bulware. Ole Miss was really in on a 5-star guy out of Memphis, an offensive tackle that I'm sure Bud is very familiar with, Drew Richmond. And, of course, Khalil McKenzie, he had the advantage being a legacy recruit. But Khalil McKenzie, I mean, he's a 5-star defensive tackle, one of the best players in the entire country, and he stuck with Tennessee all the way through. So really this was sort of the opposite of some of the previous Vol signing days where guys went other directions and, the fans sort of had that bad taste in their mouth of impending doom as the day went on.
All right, the Tennessee roster and depth chart, obviously very young, but where do you see, name-wise, guys getting opportunities come this fall?
Well, there's 2 main positions. And, we talk about adding recruiting class. You can really talk about flash or you can talk about the substance. And Butch Jones really went out and got the beef there. So on the defensive line, you're looking at defensive tackle. Tennessee loses one of the 2 starters. It's a very thin depth chart there. And you've got a guy, like I said, Khalil McKenzie is going to come in. You have another 5-star originally rated recruit out of North Carolina, Shai Tuttle. He's another huge defensive lineman. He's something like 6'3", 330 pounds right out of high school. Now, the Vols didn't start a single defensive lineman last year, more than 300 pounds.
Jeez.
And these are guys who've been on campus for a while. So on the other side of the ball, on offensive line, you're looking at 2 big guys again. You're looking at Drew Richmond, who flipped from Ole Miss, and you're looking at Jack Jones, who's from right outside of Nashville. He's a local boy. So those two inside of Tennessee guys, both tackles. Tennessee had extreme trouble last year running the ball. They lost all 5 starters off of the 2013 line.
Right.
And so they just really couldn't get any push last year. And so you're looking at, throwing in a Jack Jones who's a 4-star tackle, throwing in a Drew Richmond who's a 5-star tackle. Even if those guys don't start, they're going to push the guys ahead of them to make them better. And that's just very exciting for Tennessee fans.
Makes sense. Hunter, thank you very much for joining us. Tennessee certainly adds to not just obviously SEC East, but SEC depth in general. The SEC West had the regular season, struggled late. SEC East didn't have their moments during the regular season, finished strong. It looks like we're looking at a much more complete conference as a whole with, Terry Beckner adding to the talent level in Mizzou, with Tennessee adding everybody. They should be able, because honestly, if you're going to win in the SEC, it starts with offensive and defensive line depth.
And James Franklin got out of Vanderbilt at the right time.
Yes.
Because those schools are smashing Vanderbilt's glass slipper.
That is absolutely true. All right. We've taken a look at a lot of the early impact guys. The SEC as a whole, not surprisingly, did outstandingly well. Let's look at ACC. Let's start with your area of expertise. Let's look at the Florida State Seminoles. Obviously, there are some Florida State fans that are disappointed in some of the, calling it a whiff wouldn't be that accurate, but some of the guys that they felt like they perhaps should have been in on coming down to signing day. Byron Coward, obviously not local, but relatively local. How do you evaluate the class as a whole? How does it compare to previous classes?
Only 4 and 5 stars, Dan.
Right.
I mean, that's not Alabama.
Poor you.
I think Florida State did a really good job. I think I'd probably give the class about an A-. They did need another defensive lineman, in my opinion.
Right.
They didn't get Terry Beckner. And they really had this class, for the most part, wrapped up about a month ago.
Yes.
And you can look at that in a couple ways. You can say, A, they failed to finish, or you can say, well, they pretty easily procured most of the guys at whom they had a reasonable shot, and then down the stretch were more long shots. So I guess it kind of depends on how you want to look at it. It's not perfect. It's still really, really good. They're still following the formula to win national titles. Derwin James is actually the highest rating that Rivals.com has ever given to a safety.
Really? What makes him so good?
He's 6'2", 210, and runs like a 4.4 and just hits like a truck. He takes over the game as a safety, which is something you don't typically see from that position. And against these spread offenses nowadays, if you have a safety who's that versatile, we saw it with LaMarcus Joyner, we see it with Jalen Ramsey sometimes.
He can come up and play the nickel if needed, come up against the run in the box, play center field.
The other thing Florida State did really well was they early enrolled 8 kids.
Yes.
6 of them are blue chips. And when you lose half your starters to graduation or to the NFL, you need that infusion of talent. You need those guys in the program early, lifting weights, getting acclimated to the college life, understanding the playbook and all that stuff. Tennessee also did a great job with that. Clemson, Auburn, all with a lot of early enrollees. That's becoming a bigger and bigger thing this year. And I think next year, maybe with the early signing period, we'll see more of that as well. Florida State signed Josh Sweat, the player who most likely would have been the #1 overall recruit had he not blown up his knee. George Campbell, a 5-star receiver out of the Tampa area. Florida State finally goes down and does a good job in the Tampa area. Jacques Patrick, running back out of Orlando. Like him a lot. Tavares McFadden, a 5-star corner. They lose both corners in P.J. Williams and Ronald Darby to the league, so needed some help there and got it. They also grabbed Marcus Lewis late, and we'll see if they get Iman Marshall here in the 4 o'clock hour. I think he's going to USC.
I was going to say,
we'll see.
That's a big one. Biggie Marshall probably not heading to USC, or probably not heading to Florida State, but we shall see. He visited later on in the process. Without his parents, so that's a sign. Who to you are the biggest, we've seen some of the fax machine drama. Who to you are the biggest shockers, I would say, of signing day or the recent process? Who to you is like, wow, was not seeing that at all?
Van Jefferson, I think, to Georgia. If that ends up sticking, I mean, I didn't even think he was considering Georgia anymore, and apparently they were still on him. I thought Ryan Davis was going to Florida, up until maybe just the last minute, and he ends up at Auburn. I'm trying to think. Most of this went kind of as planned. I think we're 7 for 8 so far, or 7 for 7 so far.
UCLA pulled a couple kids
They did.
out from nowhere near UCLA.
I thought they would get Roquan. I wasn't sure if they would get Chris Clark or not, the tight end who early this morning picked UCLA over Michigan. He was a former Michigan commit, but Roquan, the noise was out there for at least a couple weeks that he was going to UCLA. All
right, and next year, to sort of preview next year a little bit, what positions, what regions look strong for 2016? It's never too early.
Just early on in Florida, great receiver year. I think 11 of the top 20 recruits in Florida next year, on one list I saw, are receivers, which is a little bit maybe too much. But that's That's still really impressive. Next year's going to be a better offensive tackle year for sure. We have Greg Allen out of Texas, and he's already an A&M commitment. Somebody I like a lot. He looks more like a prototypical number 1 overall type player. Defensive line should again be strong. It's going to be a nice year.
All right. Any coaches that obviously the first part of the offseason after the national championship or in that sort of area is new coaches and how are they going to do on the recruiting trail, and then the second part is actual recruiting.
Sure.
So when you pay attention, there's been a lot of big schools actually. Florida, Wisconsin, Nebraska, a lot of really large schools that have had to scramble. Michigan, obviously, probably the biggest headliner of them all. We're going to get into the Big Ten on the later show. But to you, how do you evaluate the job that the new coaches have done with not too much time?
I think Mike Riley's done a pretty good job at Nebraska. I mean, they're not going to recruit on that Ohio State level. It's just not going to happen, pretty much regardless of who comes in there as a coach. But he's done a nice job getting some names there. Michigan, I think, is being smartly selective here. Next year is going to be a big class numbers-wise for Michigan. This year they just weren't in on many guys because the writing was on the wall for Brady Hoke early on in the season. It's hard to make up all that ground. Same goes for Jim McElwain. They were in on the big 3 in Florida. They were smart taking some kids where they needed to, but not just reaching for name after name after name to fill depth. Those are 3 guys I'm definitely going to be looking for. And then I think you're going to get into some areas where you want to start seeing more wins on the field. You know, could Ole Miss keep recruiting at that level without increasing their win total? Is Tennessee going to turn these players into wins? James Franklin at Penn State, they have a lot of excitement around them. Is he going to start winning more ball games on the field? I think those are 3 programs to watch to see how much they can step forward on the field to sustain their second and third year recruiting classes.
Who have been your big whiffs thus far? Before we started the show, and we're talking about ACC with Florida State, but Miami. One of those teams that's in a region with a ton of talent, but also a team and a program without a ton in the way of buzz right now. They're coming off of a 6-7 season. It seems like just in terms of the reputation of the program as a whole, they should always be able to pull kids, legacy kids at this point with the success that they had in the 80s and 90s. What seems to be stalling their recruiting momentum?
They're just not winning ball games on the field.
Yeah.
It's not, and it seems like other programs have passed them in terms of facilities and commitment to winning. I mean, you just saw me scrolling here, 28th in the country on 247 Sports rankings, can probably only go lower given that the West Coast team still have players to sign. 20 signees, 5 blue chips. It's just not very impressive. They're not really doing they're not bringing in the top talent in Miami. It's going out of state. It's going to Tallahassee. It's going to Gainesville.
All right. Are there names that you feel like could reverse? Because obviously Brad Kaya has a very nice year. Duke Johnson has had a couple of excellent years. He's now headed off to the NFL. When you look at Miami's class, who are the guys that can raise 6 wins to 8 wins to 9 wins? I
like Jaquan Johnson a lot, the safety they got out of Killian. He's been a local star down there for a long time. Stuck with his Miami commitment. Mark Walton is another running back in that kind of Duke Johnson mold. Very shifty, maybe a little more powerful than Duke was as a young player. A guy who I think is going to be asked to carry part of the load they have, along with Joe Yearby, who they signed last year. He was Dalvin Cook's old backfield mate at Miami Central. All
right, when you look elsewhere in the ACC, who has done a good job? Obviously, Pitt hiring a new coach in Pat Narduzzi away from Michigan State. NC State has a nice bounce-back year. North Carolina, an uneven year on the field, but they were recruiting really well under Butch Davis, has obviously taken a step back on the recruiting trail. When you look across the ACC, who impresses you?
Clemson.
Yeah.
I mean, Clemson is clearly separating themselves from everyone else in the ACC as that number 2 team. The gap between them and the next recruiting class is huge. Yeah. Much, much bigger than the gap between Florida State and Clemson. Yeah. It's really kind of a 1A, 1B, 5 or 6, whatever.
Yeah, it seems like every year the Florida State-Clemson game is that sort of de facto ACC championship. As good as Georgia Tech was this past year.
Decided the division last 5 years.
Yeah, so Florida State and Clemson, it seems like that's who it used to be BCS, but now the New Year's Eve, New Year's Day bound. What have they done really well, and what have they not done super well on the recruiting trail, Clemson, that have sort of kept them from surpassing Florida State?
Well, Clemson has always recruited skill talent really well. Sammy Watkins, all those guys. And this year they did the same thing. Deion Kane from Florida, Ray McLeod from Florida. But this year they also added a lot of really good offensive and defensive linemen. Albert Huggins, Christian Wilkins, Mitch Hyatt, Jake Vermogen, whose dad played at Alabama. 2 of those guys, from the Florida area. Clemson is finally getting the beef on both sides to go with all that excellent skill talent they've amassed, and that's very impressive, and it's something I think they needed to take that next step, and we're seeing it. They have number 6 or 7 recruiting class right now, as all these numbers trickle in. 25 signees, 14 early enrollees. That's That's a ton.
It's impressive, as you mentioned, to get them on campus, to get them acclimated, to get them in spring ball to sort of learn playbook, learn the position. And Clemson, honestly, when you talk about what they've done on the field, which is still the more important thing, was there a better defense in college football than what the Tigers were looking like at the end of the season last year? I don't know that that's true.
No.
And that goes a long way just for not even this year, but for next year. These relationships are over 2-3 years that the coaches have with these recruits.
Yeah.
So when you can point to, like, look at Vic Beasley, look at all these guys that we're putting in the NFL, that's going to pay dividends this year, next year, the year after. And obviously, when you look at the talent coming in, you mentioned Wilkins and Hyatt on both, offensive and defensive line, because the offensive line, that's where they did struggle at times to recruit. It appears that they're filling in those gaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So ACC, something to pay attention to. Hopefully, you have a lot of good coaching in the division, but the talent level outside of Florida State and Clemson just doesn't appear to be there at the moment.
No,
but
they're getting whipped by the SEC in most spots.
Excellent. All right, so let's touch on Clemson a little bit more. We have Ben Burrows from Shaking the Southlands. I'm assuming, Ben, you're in a fantastic mood right now. Why wouldn't you be? How are you feeling about the Tigers class this year?
Hey, Dan, pleasure to continue to break up this SEC talk with you. I actually go by Quacking Tiger is my screen name that I go by, and I wanted to quickly, explain to people. I'm not a confused Oregon and Clemson fan.
Damn.
It actually refers to when Coach Sweeney called the internets, and specifically Shaking the Southland, a bunch of quacking ducks. And you're right. We don't have much to quack about lately. 2015 class is probably historically good.
Yes.
Probably the best in the past 20 years for the Tigers. And like Bud said, it starts with five-star, at least to me, five-star wide receiver Deion Kane. People don't understand that Clemson just has not been able to recruit at all in the Tampa area. And we've grabbed arguably three of the top players in the region. With Kane, you get a guy who plays quarterback for his high school, but then blows everyone away at wide receiver at camps and 7-on-7s, puts on the pads and does it again in the Army All-American game. He's silky smooth, glides down the field, great hands, but we don't really know how high his ceiling is. Obviously, the Sammy Watkins comparisons come, and I think, Deion will have a bit of an acclimation period. Sammy was kind of ready on day one, but he's an NFL-level talent. Roddy White is the guy who comes to mind for me. And then you have fellow Tampa product Ray McLeod, another dynamic playmaker. He's going to line up everywhere as a hybrid wide receiver, running back for Clemson. Elite lateral agility, tougher runner than I think people give him credit for. A little intrigue with an Auburn visit over the weekend to help out a teammate. You got to love it when national media get their chains pulled a little bit. And so, with dynamic playmakers again, but like Bud said, it's not just dynamic playmakers this year. I think somebody that we're not talking enough about in this class is the third Tampa product, tackle Jake Vermorgan, who's from, powerhouse Plant High School. With Mitch Hyatt, you have a franchise left tackle, but Hyatt and Vermorgan give you bookend tackles at a position that's always held Clemson back a little bit. Jake understands the position, advanced technician, well coached, just needs that upper body strength, and I think he's ready to go at right tackle. This is probably the best offensive line class in over a decade for Clemson.
When you look at what Clemson actually loses, though, it's a lot on defense. Which of these guys, Huggins and Wilkins, obviously are the big names on the inside of the defensive line, but they did recruit defense quite well this year. What are the names that you feel like, whether they're enrolling early or not, that will see the field in either a starting or rotational way with the way that their depth chart shapes up for this fall?
Well, on defense, I'm going with War Daddy defensive tackle Christian Wilkins, and that's not a term I use often. There were questions about his level of competition in Connecticut, questions he answered as he high-stepped into the end zone and blocked a kick in the Under Armour All-American game. Powerful. He can rush the passer as a three-tech or stuff the run. I think he's ready to step into the two deep immediately, something that Clemson will really need with the loss of Grady Jarrett, who was just a rock on the inside for these past 2 years. And somebody under the radar that on the defensive end is Clellan Ferrell, who's a weak side defensive end from Virginia. He slid down the recruiting rankings because of an ACL injury, but he's 6'5", has length, wingspan, really big, strong hands. And although he'll probably redshirt with the need Clemson has at defensive end, I think that's the position that'll probably hold us back from a playoff run in 2016. There's lots of opportunity there. Defensive end. Austin Bryan is another guy who probably will get a chance to play. And I should also note that, Clemson today landed 3 key prospects to the 2016 class. So this is going to continue to roll on, 5 and 4-star players. We're looking for another top 5 finish in 2016.
All right, and on the offensive side of the ball, we did talk about the playmakers. Get specific. Who is built, who has the skill to play right away? Obviously, losing 2 wide receivers after last season, or the 2013 season, didn't make a huge impact as they got a lot of good play out of the guys that stepped in. So who is ready at this point, whether it be on special teams, whether it's at running back, receiver, tight end, whoever? Who in this class do you feel like has the talent to step into an offense that will be with a new coordinator?
With Jeff Scott and Tony Elliott, they're just going to try and continue to run the Chad Morris's offense. So
Right.
Absolutely, Deion Kane is seeing the field. Absolutely, Ray McLeod will get touches in different places, and they'll utilize his talent. He'll probably be a kick returner as well. I think that the 2 tackles that I talked about will step into the 2 deep immediately. Mitch Hyatt and Jake Morgan will get time somewhere along the interior, along the offensive line, because we're so thin at offensive line. We don't really have a right tackle right now. So those guys will definitely, on the offensive side of the ball, see time.
Ben Burrows, thank you very much for your time. Another guy who should be sleeping well tonight.
Yep.
Clemson, yes, we did break up the SEC Love Fest.
Should have been sleeping well for weeks. I mean, all those early enrollees.
That is a good time to be a Colt. Let me make sure I get this right. It's Clampson with like a P, a hidden P in there?
Right.
It's Clampson.
There's no Z.
There's no Z. It's not Clemson. Clemson.
That's how it was explained to me. It's more
I'm not from the South.
Clemson. You got to emphasize the S, not the Z.
Right, there it is. Okay, and it's Boise. It's not Boise.
Right.
I learned that as well. It's the
Really?
equivalent. Yeah, it's Boise.
Okay.
Yeah, I learned that. So yes, the ACC, Florida State, and Clemson have separated themselves. Georgia Tech, obviously, with great on-field results last season, but they certainly have to recruit with higher academic standards than most and recruit to a specific system that requires specific types of players, sizes, skill sets that perhaps other schools don't. But Georgia Tech, they seem to be in a good place. Like after last season, it seemed like they were going into like, should Paul Johnson still be here? Should they still be running the option? And then they were ridiculous to end the season.
Georgia Tech's not going to win a national title, but they're also not going to miss many bowl games.
Right.
Is 8-9 wins a year at Georgia Tech good enough to keep those fans happy? I think it probably is, and they won the division again last year. I think it's the 2nd or 3rd time.
Yep.
Paul Johnson has done that in his tenure, and then they crushed Mississippi State in the Orange Bowl down there after just falling short against Florida
raise
State.
your hand if you're an ACC coach who wants to play Georgia Tech with no time to prepare.
No, that's not really fun.
Yeah, I don't think Florida State scored a touchdown in the second half against Georgia
they didn't.
Tech.
They had to rely on field goals.
They relied on field goals, so Georgia Tech is in a good place, which, it sort of shows you, yes, you do need to rely on big-time talent to win consistently and to be a playoff contender, but if you run a system, if you know how to recruit to that specific system, get time to redshirt players, get time to get early enrollees, and to find guys that fit what you're trying to do, you can succeed consistently. And that's what Georgia Tech has done. We're gonna move on shortly to I guess a semi-ACC team. I guess that's the only way to describe Notre Dame.
Yes.
That they sort of play half of their schedule as if they were a pseudo ACC team, but they themselves have done a good job. And by the way, before we get into,
do we have time, real quick, to mention
please
a apparel update?
What do we have?
CeCe Jefferson is wearing an LSU jacket at his barbecue after eliminating LSU. That's he's not announced yet,
right?
But he's wearing an LSU jacket, which is just another wrinkle.
Another wrinkle.
How much analysis should you place on the clothes that recruits wear leading up to their announcements?
All those free clothes that they get that.
Occasionally,
so much.
Occasionally, you want to look at the hats because the recruit might, crease his hat or might leave it as a nice flat bill, and the other 3 hats might just be very poor quality that you picked up at a gas station or something.
Right.
And of course, he's not going to put one of those on.
He's
he wants
not
to
going
look
to put
fresh.
a low-quality hat on.
Right. So if one hat stands out as a much nicer hat than the other 3 hats are on the table, that's oftentimes a good indication where he's going to go.
That is somebody who has watched a lot of signing ceremonies, a lot of faxing ceremonies, and has spoken to far, far too many, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds.
Exactly.
He's got to get in their mind. He knows his recruiting, Bud Elliott. Notre Dame, interestingly enough, they do well every year on the recruiting trail. I don't know if there's the highest of high levels, Alize Jones. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yep.
I should point out that I am going to mispronounce 87% of the names that I say out loud today on this show, in our 5 p.m. Eastern show. But yeah, Notre Dame put together a very nice class. Once again, Brian Kelly has done a great job recruiting nationally, as he must do, since there's not a ton of talent in the state of Indiana. But we are now joined by, speaking of mispronouncing names, Jamie, is it Ueyama? Am I getting that right?
That was pretty close. Pretty close.
How would you go about pronouncing your own name?
It's Ueyama.
Ueyama. Perfect. All right. So, Jamie, you are a contributor to One Foot Down, of course, the fine Notre Dame site and community on the SB Nation network. What are your instant takeaways looking at the class that Brian Kelly and his staff have put together? Have they addressed the needs, and who are the names that we should know immediately?
I think the class as a whole, it's a good but not great class.
Okay.
Anytime you're bringing in, they're going to sign 14 four-stars, assuming that Equanimeous St. Brown, he's going to announce.
What a name!
At 3 o'clock. The best name in the recruiting class by far. Assuming he signs with Notre Dame, which all signs are pointing towards that. They have 14 four-stars. It's a pretty good class. There's definitely some good talent in there. Elise Jones, you mentioned him. He's the one guy who definitely stands out. I think he's an instant impact kind of guy. But they didn't hit all their needs in the class. They missed out on safety. It looks like they're going to miss out on safety. They're still waiting on one guy, Nathan Meters, who looks like he's going to go to UCLA. But, it's not they missed out. Prentice McKinney, who was originally committed to Notre Dame, flipped to Oklahoma, and there was an academic issue where he wasn't going to get into Notre Dame anymore, and they really didn't have a good backup plan in place, and they're really short of safety. So that's the one spot they missed pretty bad.
All right, and what are the names? Obviously, Tristan Hodge coming in from Idaho. Certainly not a traditional recruiting ground for Notre Dame, but certainly they also go everywhere to find guys that fit Notre Dame. Who do you think has the opportunity, given openings and perhaps thin depth, could come in right away this fall and contribute?
I think Sean Crawford, the corner from Michigan, from Ohio, but he's a former Michigan commit.
Yeah.
I think if he's a couple inches taller, he's probably a 5-star. He's that kind of athlete. He's probably not going to start or get a chance of starting, provided that Kavari Russell is back. Cole Luke, really good corners coming back as well. But he has a really good shot at being the third corner and playing quite a bit. Might even get in the mix to be a punt returner. Definitely contribute on special teams. He's a guy who I think can make an impact right away. And then on offense, they're pretty loaded at wide receiver, even though they're bringing in a good wide receiver class. So Jones is the one guy that you would think that he's got a good shot. They're bringing back four-star tight ends to the team, but none of those guys, they're all potential, no production so far. So Ben Koyak's graduating, of course, so he's probably going to have the best shot at some early playing time on offense.
And from what you've seen of Brandon Wimbush, of course, he flipped from Penn State not terribly long ago to go to Notre Dame in South Bend. How much does he fit? Obviously, the quarterback position looks to be in a little bit of flux with Golson and Zaire moving forward. If Golson, I think if he returns to South Bend, what does Wimbush present? It appears that he has some pretty good size coming out of high school. What does he present in terms of immediate, perhaps not this year, maybe next year, availability?
He could definitely compete for the next year, but it all depends, right? If Zaire wins a job and Golson transfers, well, Zaire's going to be returning, and they always have Deshaun Kaiser's the other quarterback on the roster right now. He's another Elite 11 kid. Brian Kelly's done a really terrific job at recruiting quarterbacks the last few years, and all the guys are, they're dual threat guys, really good arms. Just Zaire's probably the only one who's more of a runner than a passer, but Wimbush, I would say that maybe on another team, on another roster, he'd have a better shot at playing after, redshirting a year, but he's still going to be in tough. There's a lot of competition at the position, but the guy has a phenomenal arm, probably the best arm in the entire recruiting class. It's something to see in person. I'm sure Bud can tell you. It's amazing.
Yeah, I was
Personally,
amazed that
guys
his
got done.
high school receivers didn't break their fingers all the time. The ball makes a sound when it comes off his hand. It's like zoom.
And it's
Yeah.
not an easy state to play high school football in, New Jersey weather-wise. All right.
Not a good year for quarterbacks east of the Mississippi River
True.
this year. Very, very heavily loaded in the central region and the western region, but not in the east. So Notre Dame did a good job after they lost Barnett to go and get Wimbush.
Yes. Jamie, thank you very much for your time. We're actually going to be talking to Jamie a little bit later because he also covers the Pac-12 and the recruiting far, far out west. So very excited to have him on once again.
Thanks, Jamie.
Put on your hat, bud.
Let's put on hats.
Put on some hats. I'm gonna ask you some hypotheticals. I feel
All right.
good because you probably recognize Bud a little bit more if you follow SB Nation Recruiting on Twitter. That's Bud in his natural element, and you do that just because you want to pop, you want to peacock
Right.
when you're out on the road. You want to be memorable. You're interviewing kids have to do so many interviews. You got the beard, you got the hat, and you feel good. All right. So here's my question to you.
All right.
You can draft 5 guys from the class of 2015 to your team. Let's say it's a draft format. So you want to build a team around 5 guys. Anybody available in the class? Who are you going with?
Oh, good question.
Who to you is the most ready? And this is for a game tomorrow
game
against
tomorrow.
a
Okay.
college team. Let's say against an above-average college team. Let's say they have to play against who is the most above-average college team? Let's call it like Stanford.
Okay.
Like an 8-4-ish team.
I think because the biggest difference between high school and college is A, quarterback play, and B, line play. Skill guys can step in and make an immediate impact, but there's very few guys nationally who can make that immediate impact on the lines.
Right.
So I think you got to go very, very line heavy here. That would be Khalil McKenzie and Trent Thompson for sure.
Okay.
I'm going to need a quarterback. I think Josh Rosen is probably the most college ready.
Okay.
And then I don't even know if I need to draft any skill guys because I think there's a lot of depth in this class, maybe not a lot of super high-end skill guys
Right.
at receiver and running back. Martez Ivey is the best tackle out there, I think.
Okay.
So even though I don't know if he's the most college ready, compared to maybe previous number 1 overall offensive tackles, you got to protect Josh Rosen's blind side.
So we got Rosen, Ivy, and the 2 defensive tackles.
That's 4.
number 5.
And give me Derwin James.
Derwin James,
Yeah.
the safety.
Yeah.
Changes the game. You got a game plan around him.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, his name is Buddy Elliott, and here's what you should know. We're back here at 5 p.m. Eastern, which I think works out to 2 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Mountain. Hawaii would be, God, is that like 11 a.m.?
That's
6 hours behind, so 11 a.m. in Hawaii. We're talking Big 10, Big 12, and Pac-12, all sorts of fantastic guests. We're breaking down everything class of 2015, and be sure to follow at SBN Recruiting to follow Bud and the staff that he has. They do an amazing job putting out news, putting out recruiting analysis, scouting reports, everything. Do yourself a favor. But that is it for the 1 p.m. show. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to Bud. Thank you for everybody that called in. Follow all of them on Twitter. We will see you very shortly.